The night sky over the Norwegian mountains tore open like fabric ripped by invisible hands. Something burning fell through the darkness, trailing fire and sparks across the stars. It screamed as it fell, a sound that made the wolves stop howling and the owls go silent in their trees. The object crashed into the dense forest of Hardangervidda with the force of a meteor, sending ancient pines splintering like matchsticks and carving a scar into the earth that glowed with unnatural heat. Inside the wreckage of what had once been a sleek combat vessel, Silvara struggled to breathe. Pain radiated through every nerve in her body. She was Draconai, one of the ancient celestial guard who had protected the galaxy's peace for millennia. Her kind resembled Earth's mythical dragons, but they were flesh and blood, not legend. Her body stretched nearly 20 feet long, covered in scales that shimmered between deep violet and midnight blue. 6 limbs, each ending in razor-sharp talons, lay twisted beneath her. Her wings, magnificent membranes of silver and pearl, were torn and bleeding the luminescent blue blood of her species. A jagged piece of her ship's hull had pierced through her chest, missing her primary heart by mere inches. She had 3 hearts, a feature that had saved her life countless times in battle. But now, even with 3 hearts pumping, she was dying. Blue blood pooled around her, glowing faintly in the darkness of the shattered cockpit. "Status," she whispered, her voice a rasp of pain. The ship's artificial intelligence flickered to life weakly. Critical damage to all systems. Life support at minimal capacity. Pursuers detected in orbital approach. Estimated arrival in 13 solar cycles. 13 days. Silvara closed her amber eyes, each one with a vertical pupil that could see across multiple light spectrums. 13 days before her former brothers and sisters in the Celestial Guard found her and executed her for treason. That was what they called it. Treason. Refusing orders. Breaking the sacred oath. She called it refusing to murder children. The memory burned in her mind with painful clarity. The planet Thessera Minor, a world of peaceful beings who communicated through bioluminescent patterns on their skin. They had done nothing wrong except exist in a region that the Galactic Council wanted to claim. The Celestial Guard had been ordered to pacify the population. Pacify. Such a gentle word for genocide. Silvara had served for 400 years. She had fought pirates and defended colonies and kept the peace across 1,000 worlds. But she had never been asked to kill innocents before. When the order came to fire on the civilian settlements, she had made her choice. She turned her weapons on her own fleet and ran. For 6 years she had been running, jumping from system to system, always one step ahead of the hunters, until her ship finally gave out above this small blue planet the locals called Earth. A primitive world, pre-spaceflight, perfect for hiding, perfect for dying. With a groan that sent fresh waves of agony through her body, Silvara forced herself to move. Her 4 primary limbs pushed against the crushed metal, her 2 smaller secondary arms bracing against the deck. She pulled herself forward, each movement leaving a trail of glowing blue blood. The hull fragment embedded in her chest shifted, and she roared in pain, the sound echoing through the shattered forest. She dragged herself out of the wreckage and collapsed onto cold earth. The air here was thin and sharp, filled with scents she had never encountered. Pine resin, mountain flowers, clean water from a nearby stream. Above her, the stars looked different from this angle, constellations she did not recognize. She was far from home, far from everything she had ever known. The forest was eerily quiet, all the animals frightened away by her crash. Silvara knew she could not stay near the ship. When the hunters came, this would be the first place they searched. Using the last of her strength, she crawled away from the crash site, following the sound of running water. Her body left a glowing trail through the undergrowth, crushed plants and torn earth marking her passage. She found a cave carved into the mountainside by ancient glaciers. It was small, barely large enough for her broken body, hidden behind a curtain of thick moss and twisted roots. A stream ran past its entrance, clear and cold. Silvara pulled herself inside and let the darkness swallow her. For the first time in 6 years of running, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what she had lost. Her home, her honor, her purpose. Everything she had been for 4 centuries was gone, burned away in the moment she chose mercy over duty. Tears leaked from her amber eyes, mixing with the blue blood that covered her face. I am sorry, she whispered to the empty cave, to the ghosts of Thessera Minor, to the person she used to be. I am so sorry. Her consciousness began to fade, darkness creeping in from the edges of her vision. She thought of her mother, dead these 200 years, who had taught her the ancient songs of their people. She thought of the stars she would never see again. She thought of dying alone in this cold cave on a world that would never know her name. As sleep or death pulled her under, she heard something. Footsteps, light and careful, approaching through the forest. A local creature, perhaps, come to investigate the intruder. Silvara tried to lift her head, tried to see what approached, but her body would not obey. The footsteps stopped at the cave entrance. Through dimming eyes, Silvara saw a silhouette against the gray morning light. Small, young, holding something in its arms. A human child, she realized. A boy with dark eyes that held no fear, only quiet curiosity. And in that moment before darkness claimed her completely, Silvara felt something she had not felt in 6 long years. Hope. Zephyr had not spoken in 2 years. The words had left him the night the avalanche took his parents, buried them under tons of snow and ice while he watched from the cabin window. He had screamed then, screamed until his throat was raw, but no sound had come out. Since that terrible night, silence had become his companion, his shield against a world that had taken everything from him. Now he lived with his grandmother Astrid in a small wooden house perched on the edge of Hardangervita, where the mountains met the sky and eagles circled on cold winds. Astrid never pushed him to speak. She understood that some wounds went deeper than flesh, that healing happened in its own time. She taught him to communicate through gestures, through the language of hands and eyes and presence. Every morning, Zephyr walked into the forest to gather herbs and mushrooms for his grandmother's cooking. He knew every path, every hidden grove, every place where the rare cloudberries grew. The forest was his church, his sanctuary, the one place where his silence felt natural rather than broken. But this morning was different. He had heard the thunder in the night, felt the earth shake beneath his bed. When dawn came, he followed the smell of scorched wood and found devastation. Trees torn from their roots, earth blackened and smoking, and in the center of it all, a vessel that could not exist. Metal shaped like flowing water, covered in symbols that hurt his eyes to look at, still glowing with residual heat. Zephyr stood frozen, his basket of mushrooms forgotten at his feet. His mind tried to make sense of what he saw, but there was no sense to be found. This was something from beyond his world, beyond his understanding. He should run. He should find his grandmother, bring the village elders. But instead, he noticed the trail. Blue light, glowing faintly in the morning shadows. Not blood, he told himself. It could not be blood. But deep in his heart, he knew what it was. Something had crawled away from the crash. Something hurt. The trail led him up the mountainside to a cave he had explored as a child. He pushed aside the moss curtain and peered into darkness. 2 eyes stared back at him, burning like molten amber in the gloom. Zephyr's breath caught in his chest, but he did not run. He had learned that running did not save you from loss, did not protect you from pain. Sometimes you had to stand still and face what frightened you. The creature was massive, even folded into the small cave. Scales caught the dim light, shimmering purple and blue like the northern lights made solid. 6 limbs, each tipped with claws that could tear stone. Wings that looked like stained glass, torn and bleeding that strange luminescent blue. And its face, long and elegant, with those burning eyes that held intelligence and agony in equal measure. It was dying. Zephyr could see that clearly. The wound in its chest, the way its breathing came shallow and labored, the dullness creeping into those magnificent eyes. He set down his basket and sat at the cave entrance, cross-legged, making himself small and unthreatening. The creature watched him, confusion flickering across its alien features. It made a sound, low and rumbling, that vibrated in Zephyr's chest. Not words, but he understood the meaning. Why are you here? Why do you not run? Zephyr reached into his basket and pulled out a piece of dried reindeer meat, a treat his grandmother had packed for his lunch. He placed it on the cave floor and pushed it forward with gentle fingers. The creature did not move, only watched with those amber eyes that seemed to see straight through him. Time passed. The sun climbed higher, sending shafts of light through the forest canopy. A bird sang somewhere in the distance. Zephyr waited, patient as stone, while the creature decided whether to trust this strange small being who offered food instead of fear. Finally, one of the creature's 6 limbs extended, moving with painful slowness. Its claws, each one longer than Zephyr's hand, picked up the meat with surprising delicacy. It brought the food to its mouth and ate. Zephyr saw something change in those amber eyes. Not quite trust, but perhaps the beginning of it. He left more food, a water bottle from his pack, and a clean cloth that his grandmother used for bandages. Then he stood and walked away, giving the creature space, giving it time. As he left, he heard a sound behind him, soft and musical, like wind chimes made of crystal. The creature was making a sound that felt like gratitude. That night, Zephyr lay awake thinking about amber eyes and blue blood and the weight of loneliness he had seen in that cave. The creature was alone, far from its home, hurt and hunted. Just like him, in a way. Both of them carrying wounds that no one else could see. The next morning, he woke before dawn and packed his rucksack with supplies. Bandages, antiseptic, water bottles, all the dried food he could gather without making his grandmother suspicious. He also took his father's old camping blanket, worn soft with age and love. "You are going to the forest early," Astrid observed from her rocking chair, knitting needles clicking in the pre-dawn darkness. Zephyr nodded, signing with his hands. "Found something that needs help." Astrid studied his face with her sharp blue eyes, eyes that had seen 70 winters and missed nothing. "Be careful, child. The mountains hold many mysteries. Not all of them are safe." Zephyr signed back. "I will be careful. I promise." The cave was dark when he arrived, but he could hear breathing, slow and ragged. He lit his small camping lantern and gasped. The creature had tried to remove the metal fragment from its chest and failed. Fresh blue blood covered the cave floor, glowing like bioluminescent algae. The creature lay on its side, eyes half closed, each breath a struggle. Zephyr moved without thinking. He had helped his grandmother tend injured animals before, had learned about cleaning wounds and applying pressure. This was bigger, stranger, but the principle was the same. Stop the bleeding. Clean the wound. Keep the patient alive. He approached slowly, hands visible, movements gentle. The creature's eyes opened, watching him with an intensity that should have been frightening, but somehow was not. Zephyr pointed to the wound, then to his bandages, then made a gesture of wrapping and healing. The creature seemed to understand. It made that crystal chime sound again and shifted slightly, giving him access to the injury. For the next hour, Zephyr worked. He cleaned away the blue blood with his father's blanket, now ruined but serving a purpose. He packed the wound with clean bandages, applying pressure until the bleeding slowed. The creature trembled with pain but made no move to stop him, did not raise its terrible claws against him. When he finished, exhausted and covered in glowing blue stains, Zephyr sat back against the cave wall. The creature's eyes were closed, but its breathing seemed easier now, more steady. One of its smaller secondary limbs extended slowly and came to rest near Zephyr's hand, not touching, just close. A gesture of trust. Zephyr understood, then, that he had found something precious. Not just a creature from the stars, but a kindred spirit. Someone else who knew what it meant to lose everything, to run from pain, to hide in darkness while the world moved on without you. He stayed until the sun began to set, sitting in comfortable silence with this impossible being. When he finally left, he looked back to see amber eyes watching him from the shadows, and he knew he would return tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, because some bonds transcend language, transcend worlds, transcend everything except the simple truth that no one should die alone in the dark. 7 days passed like water flowing over stones. Each morning, Zephyr climbed to the hidden cave with food and water and clean bandages. Each evening, he returned home with an ache in his chest that felt somehow lighter than before. The creature, whom he had begun to think of as his friend though he had no name to call her, grew stronger with each visit. On the 3rd day, she had lifted her head to drink from his water bottle without help. On the 5th day, she had moved to the cave entrance to feel sunlight on her scales. On the 7th day, she stood on all 6 limbs and extended her damaged wings, testing their strength. They were healing, the tears knitting together with threads of silver tissue that caught the light like spider silk. Zephyr learned to read her moods through the colors that flickered across her scales. Deep violet meant pain. Soft blue meant contentment. Flashes of crimson meant fear or warning. She learned to read him too, understanding that his silence was not emptiness but a different way of being. They developed their own language, built from gestures and glances and the comfortable quiet of two souls who understood loss. She showed him memories. He did not know how she did it, but when she touched her foreclaw to his forehead, images flooded his mind. He saw vast cities floating among the stars, beings of 1,000 different shapes living together in harmony. He saw her in armor of silver and gold, standing guard over worlds he could not name. He saw the moment everything changed, children with luminescent skin running from fire, and her choice to save them instead of following orders. Zephyr wept for the first time since his parents died, not from sadness alone, but from understanding. She had given up everything to do what was right. She had chosen mercy over duty, love over law, and it had cost her everything. Just as his parents had chosen to go out in the storm to save a lost hiker, and it had cost them their lives. Good people paid prices for their goodness. The universe was not fair, but that did not mean goodness was wrong. On the 8th morning, Zephyr arrived to find her standing outside the cave, wings fully extended, head tilted toward the sky. She made a sound, low and urgent, that resonated in his bones. When she touched her claw to his forehead again, he understood. They were coming. The hunters had found her trail. 2 more days, perhaps 3, and they would arrive. Fear closed around Zephyr's throat. He had just found this friend, this connection to something larger than his small world of grief and silence. He could not lose her too. He would not. That night, Zephyr did something he had not done in 2 years. He went to his grandmother and spoke. His voice came out rusty and strange, words tumbling over each other after so long locked inside. But he forced them out. He told her everything. The crash, the creature, the bond they had formed, the danger that approached. Astrid listened without interruption, her knitting needles still for once in her weathered hands. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire that crackled in the hearth. "Your grandfather," she finally said, "once told me a story his grandfather told him, about the night sky opening up and a being of light falling into these very mountains. About how our people hid this being from soldiers who came searching. About how that being taught us songs we still sing at midsummer, songs that are not quite Norwegian, not quite anything of this earth." She looked at Zephyr with eyes that suddenly seemed ancient. Perhaps history repeats itself. Perhaps these mountains remember how to keep secrets. Together, they made a plan. Astrid knew every family in the surrounding villages, knew which ones could be trusted with impossible truths. By dawn, a network had been activated, old families who remembered old stories and understood that some things mattered more than laws or fear. When the hunters arrived on the 10th day, they found the crash site empty, the trail gone cold. Local authorities, alerted by concerned citizens, had secured the area. No, they had seen no alien creature. No, there was nothing here but a meteorite, strange but not supernatural. The paperwork would take weeks to process. Perhaps the hunters would like to wait in town? Meanwhile, Zephyr led his friend through secret paths his ancestors had used for generations. Tunnels carved by glaciers, caves that connected like veins through the mountain's heart, places where the stone itself seemed to shift and hide what needed hiding. A dozen families took turns bringing food and supplies, their children wide-eyed but not afraid, their elders nodding as if they had expected this day. Silvara, for she had finally shared her name through their strange wordless communication, healed in darkness while humans stood guard above. She had spent 4 centuries believing she understood honor and duty. These people taught her a different kind of honor, one that protected the helpless, that chose compassion over obedience, that risked everything for a stranger from the stars. On the 14th day, the hunters left Earth, their report marking Silvara as deceased, lost in the crash. The Celestial Guard closed her file. She was history now, a cautionary tale about the price of disobedience. But in a cave deep beneath the Norwegian mountains, Silvara spread her wings and felt the pull of distant stars. She could stay here, hidden and safe, living in darkness while the years passed. Or she could fly again, not to run, but to return. To go back and tell the truth about Thessera Minor, to stand before the Galactic Council and speak for those who could not speak for themselves. She looked at Zephyr, This boy who had saved her life with nothing but dried meat and clean bandages and the gift of silent understanding. He had found his voice again in helping her. Perhaps she could find her voice too. Zephyr understood what she was asking before she touched his forehead. He saw the choice in her eyes, the terrible risk she was willing to take. He wanted to say no, to beg her to stay where she was safe. But he knew better. Safety was not the same as living. His parents had taught him that. Silvara had taught him that. He signed with his hands, the gesture they had created together. Go with courage. Come back when you can. On a clear night when the northern lights danced green and gold across the sky, Silvara took flight. Her wings, fully healed and stronger for their breaking, carried her up through the atmosphere and into the vast dark between stars. She carried with her a small stone from the Norwegian mountains, a reminder that kindness could be found in the most unexpected places. Zephyr watched until she vanished among the stars, just another point of light in the infinite darkness. His grandmother stood beside him, her hand warm on his shoulder. "Will she come back?" he asked, his voice still rough with disuse but growing stronger each day. "I do not know," Astrid said honestly, "but I think she will try, and I think that trying is what matters most." Zephyr nodded. He had learned that lesson well. You could not always win. You could not always save everyone. But you could try. You could stand up and speak truth even when your voice shook. You could offer water to a dying stranger. You could choose mercy over fear. Above them, the stars burned cold and distant. But Zephyr knew now that the universe was not as cold as it appeared. Somewhere among those lights, a dragon with violet scales was flying toward her destiny, carrying hope in her 3 hearts and a human boy's faith in her claws. And in a small house on the edge of the Norwegian wilderness, that boy slept peacefully for the first time in 2 years, dreaming not of avalanches and loss, but of stars and second chances and the bonds that connected all living things across the vast and beautiful dark. The mountains kept their secrets. The forest whispered its songs. And somewhere among the stars, a voice that had been silenced was learning to roar again. The end was just another beginning.